In this video, I want to show you how you can improve your masks using the dodge and the burn tool. And with those two tools, you can get better results even as you could achieve with the select and mask workspace. And just for comparison, let's do the Photoshop way first and then the dodge and burn way. Okay, so first I create in the basics tab a duplicate layer and a contrast layer. Let's choose a dark green for that, or maybe a lighter green. And then I use the one-click background removal. And if I hold down the Alt key and click on the mask, you see that result is not too bad. We have preserved some hair, but not all. And you see that if I switch the helping layer on and off. Oh, and there you see all the missing hair from this dialog. Of course, you can always refine that mask by clicking on it and then use select and mask. So I click on the refine button in the Docma Freistellen panel, which opens this dialog. And then I activate the refine brush and just paint over the edges. Let's choose another mode here. Let's choose overlay, and here you can see the hair, and I paint over those areas to improve them. And it looks quite good, seems to work. But we have a look at the mask in a second. You should always paint over those areas which are transparent, not in these areas which you can't look through. And that's it. And let's have a look at the mask. And the fine hair is okay here, I would say. So for a quick and dirty result, it's good. But a problem of the refine edge brush is this, that you always get those dark strands. So you can paint over them with white, but you see here are some hairs that are dark, that are black and are reaching in those areas, and that's not so good. So in this area, that's not so problematic. This is easily fixed also by the dodge tool, for instance. And here, this is also quite good. So for this area, you won't need the dodge and burn technique, except that you improve these parts here, where you can paint over with the dodge tool to make them white. And that's easily possible here. So that's a good starting point for this side. On this side, it's not convincing from my point of view. So I click on OK. And let's call this layer the select and mask layer. So, and we keep that for later. So I hide this layer and create a duplicate layer. And let's explore the alternative way. So the alternative way is by making use of the contrast of the image. So first you compare the contrast in the three channels, in the red and the green and the blue channel, and in different combinations of those channels. So let's first have a look at the red channel. This is not a good starting point for a mask because the gray of the background and the gray of the hair is almost similar. So I would not recommend to use the red channel in this case. Let's have a look at the green channel. This one is actually better, but not perfect. You see these hairs here and this one are almost the same gray as the background, so it's not perfect. Maybe the blue channel is better, and it is. You should not compare the brightness of the image, but always only look at the contrast between the background and the foreground. And if the image is darker, like in this case, you see the green channel is a little bit brighter. The blue channel is darker, but the contrast is better. But you should always have a look at the combinations too, because sometimes the difference is subtle, but very important to keep certain details. So let's have a look at the red-green combination. It's not so good. It's quite dark. The gray is quite similar. Then we have the blue and the red combination. That looks quite interesting, I have to say, because here we have a good contrast for all the small hairs. You see on this side, it's really not that problematic. Even select and mask could mask this area easily. So let's focus on this part here. And then we have the green and the blue channel. And that one is subtle, but a little bit darker. You see here the contrast is better in the red-blue combination, and we have here the green-blue combination, and that's not as good. So this is our starting point for optimizing the mask. So I click on this commit button, and there we have our starting point. In order to easily compare the result and the mask, you should click on mask in new window. Then you have these two windows besides each other. Here you have the mask. On the right side you have the result. And if you want to move both at the same time, hold down the shift key and the space bar, and you see then you can easily move both images simultaneously. And actually this is the same image. It's not two images. This is just another instance of this image. So at each time you can close each window as long as you keep one open, so you won't lose any data or any work you have done here. So maybe you want to switch the color of the helping layer. That's no problem. Go into the basic tabs and maybe choose a lighter green or a darker green. And you see, if you do that, you lose the mask view here, but that's no problem. You just have to hold down the Alt key and click on the mask to bring that back. So, and now you can start in the contrast tab of the Docma Freistellen panel to use the burn tool and the dodge tool to optimize the edges and the details here. So don't care about the inner parts or the outer parts, just have a look at the edges with those tools. And I would recommend to keep those settings. So for the burn tool, have the shadows active. So this is the range. If I activate this tool, you see this is a range for the tool where it should work. So here in the dark parts, it darkens with a little value, a small value for the exposure. So it's low strength for the tool, and the same settings apply to the dodge tool, only that you here work in the highlights to brighten the hair, and here you also use a low value for the exposure. So without further ado, let's optimize these edges, and I would recommend to start with the dodge tool. Choose a bigger brush size here by clicking on the right button. And then by using a pen and low pressure, you should paint over the hair to make the single hairs more pronounced. So don't overdo it. Don't do it like this. That's too much, because now you have the same contrast of the background with the hairs, and that's not what you want. So Command and Z to undo, and just paint a little bit over these edges. Here you can paint a little bit stronger because these are the safe areas, but you should always be very careful in these parts with the small details. You will find that you have to switch between the burn and the dodge tool often to just maintain the detail. And you can always check here in the right window your result, and if you're not pleased here, you have to work here. So that's the whole deal you have to do here. Now we want to darken the background. So I switch to the burn tool and softly paint over those edges here to make the background as black as possible without losing the fine hairs. And you see, now the hair starts to fade. So maybe I should switch back to the dodge tool and paint again over the hair to bring the fine strands back. So again, back to the burn tool. And this is always a little bit time consuming, but in the end it's worth it. So, and if you lose single hairs, that's not so dramatic. Just keep as many as possible. You see, this turns out very nice, But if I overdo, if I do like this, I lose the hair just as I lost it with the select and mask and the refine brush. So undo that and paint over it. And if you want to even work more precisely, you could lower the exposure even under 10%. I leave it at 10% here because it would take too long to optimize these structures. Yeah, if I lose that hair, I can go back, I undo this step. Maybe I lower the exposure to 6% and paint here to make the background dark. And that's quite good, that's looking good. So I go back to 10%, just click here in the Docma Freistellen panel on the value you want. And then maybe with a middle-sized brush size for the dodge tool, I go over the hair here again to pronounce them even more. And you see on the right side, that's quite good. Of course, you have to adjust the tonal values, the color of the hair and so on later. And of course, you see here the green background shines through, and that is because you haven't, or we haven't optimized this part of the mask. So we can paint over here, over those areas. And wow, that's fixed. Here the same. And if you see that the single strands are taking on some of the background, you have to switch back to the burn tool and just darken the background a bit here. So you see, it's just a constant switching of tools, but that's working quite well. Here you can see how this strand has been optimized, and that is the big advantage of having both views here inside. One is the mask view and one is the result. And now we can work along the edges here to quickly optimize these parts. And for that, I would recommend just to increase the strength, use a bigger brush size here for the burn tool in this case, and make the background dark quickly, like so. And that works often better than the quick selection tool and is even faster. Then I use the dodge tool again to brighten this part. And here I can switch to a higher exposure too, to work faster. But faster is not always better, you know. And therefore, if quality is your main concern, then I always recommend to work with low values for the exposure. So here you see there is some of the background turning gray. So I switch to the burn tool, darken that part and done. Then back to the dodge tool, doing this part, and then maybe here fixing the hair like so. And you see, I only work along the edges. I'm not concerned about the inner parts. Oh, here I have to switch back to a lower value for the exposure to not lose the hair details here. So maybe switch back. And of course, also for the dodge tool, don't use this strong exposure, use the low value. So I undo this step like so. Switch back to 10% to optimize these single hairs. Just let's have a look at this part now. I think that's looking quite good. So let's zoom out. And what you now have to do is to fill the areas which are background or foreground with black or with white. So just activate the lasso tool with the letter L. Then select the background like so. and now fill it with black. You can paint with a paintbrush over those areas and with black color, or you can just use a shortcut if black is the background color, and this shortcut is Command and Backspace. And now you do the same for the inner part. So with a lasso, you select those inner parts. So just have a look at this side now. We don't bother about the right side, as I said. And now I fill this with white. And if white is the foreground color, you can use Option or Alt and the Backspace key. And now this is the mask we have now. So you can always optimize this mask further. And one of these optimizations is, of course, the color of these regions, which are now transparent. I would not recommend to use the color decontamination in the Select and Mask workspace, but just create a new layer. Make a clipping mask by holding down the Alt key and clicking between both layers, and then change the layer mode to color. And now you select the brush with a soft brush tip, and now select a color near where you want to paint. So in this case here, for instance, and paint over those areas to give the hair the right color. And maybe you want to pronounce the small hair here, then you use a dark color and paint over those areas, and then those parts get more visible. And in this case, in this way, you can easily fix those parts. This is not perfect, of course. This is very coarse, but on this size, I think the results are quite good. So have fun with this technique by using dodge and burn. And of course, you can use the dodge and burn method also to refine the automatic results you get with Photoshop. For instance, the select subject, or with the object selection tool. And then you can go into the mask. You can show the mask in a new window by using this button. And then you can refine that mask with these two tools, the burn tool and the dodge tool. And if you want to have more precision, use a very low value for the exposure. And most of the time you work with the burn tool in the shadows mode, in the shadows range, and with the dodge tool in the highlights range. And if you have something like this, where the gray is rather to the middle, you can always switch to the midtones. And this way it works a little bit faster to brighten those parts. You see, if I paint here and choose a stronger value for the exposure, that works quite well. And once you reach the brighter areas, you switch back to the highlights, and you can easily fix those parts by painting here over those areas. And then again, using the burn tool, you can refine those edges also, just for the purpose that it works faster with a high exposure value. And this way it's easy to refine your mask. And I'd say, yeah, have fun with that.